The alarm bells rang across every world in the Galactic Coalition. Not the soft chimes that meant trade disputes or border problems. These were the deep, terrible sounds that meant the end of everything was coming. Admiral Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the news reports flood in from across the galaxy. Each message was worse than the last. The Kepler system had gone dark 3 days ago. Just gone. Where there used to be 5 planets and a bright yellow star, there was now nothing but empty black space. "Sir, we're getting reports from the Vega." "Sector now," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, her voice shaking as she read from her screen. The whole system just disappeared. Ships that were there yesterday are sending distress calls from empty space. Kyle had been in the Space Navy for 20 years. He had fought pirates and rebels. He had seen Star Wars and planet invasions, but he had never seen anything like this. Entire solar systems were being eaten by something that moved through space. Like a hungry shadow dot, the thing eating the galaxy had a name in the old books. The Zentari called it the Void Swarm. The history files said it was a race of creatures made of pure energy that fed on stars and planets. They had appeared before, millions of years ago, and nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy. Then they had vanished into the dark space between galaxies, and everyone hoped they were gone forever. But they were back, and they were hungrier than ever. Kyle's communication screen lit up with an urgent message. The seal of the Galactic Coalition High Command appeared, followed by words that made his heart skip a beat. He was being summoned to Nexus Prime, the Coalition's capital world, for an emergency session of the Grand Council. This had never happened before. Humans had been part of the Coalition for only 93 years. They were still considered the new kids, barely advanced enough to deserve a seat at the small table, let alone the big one. Most of the older alien races treated humans like children who had just learned to walk. "Set course for Nexus Prime," Kyle ordered. "Maximum speed." The journey took 2 days, and every hour brought worse news. The Void Swarm was moving faster now, consuming 3 or 4 star systems every day. Millions of ships were fleeing ahead of the darkness, carrying refugees who had nowhere safe to go. Nexus Prime was chaos when Kyle arrived. The massive space station that served as the Coalition's headquarters was surrounded by more ships than he had ever seen in one place. Every species in the galaxy seemed to be here, all of them afraid. The Grand Council chamber was a huge dome where representatives from 200 different worlds could meet. Kyle had seen pictures of it, but being there in person was overwhelming. The ceiling showed a real-time map of the galaxy, with red zones marking where the Void Swarm had struck. More red appeared every minute. Kyle took his place in the small section reserved for human representatives. Around him sat the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Zentari looked like tall gray creatures with 4 arms and heads full of complex math. The Etherians were beautiful blue beings who could read minds and see the future. The Corvan Empire's delegates were massive and covered in armor that could stop planet-killer weapons. All of them looked terrified. High Chancellor Vex of the Zentari stood at the center of the chamber. His voice was calm, but Kyle could hear the fear underneath. "The situation is beyond critical," Vex announced. "Our greatest scientists have run every calculation. Our most powerful weapons have been tested against swarm scout units. Every probability matrix shows the same result. We cannot win this war." A Corvan general stood up, his voice booming through the chamber. "My fleets have engaged the swarm 17 times. Our plasma cannons pass through them like air. Our fusion bombs explode harmlessly against their energy forms. They consume our ships and grow stronger." An Etherian council member's mental voice touched every mind in the room. "We have tried to reach their consciousness, to understand their thoughts and find weakness. But their minds are alien beyond comprehension. They think only of hunger and consumption. They cannot be reasoned with or turned from their path. Kyle listened as species after species reported the same thing. The great hive queens, whose insect armies numbered in the trillions, had retreated to their deepest worlds. The silicon lords who could reshape matter with their thoughts had gone into hiding. The energy beings who lived inside stars had fled to other galaxies. Everyone was giving up. "We face extinction," Chancellor Vex said quietly. "In our long history, we have survived wars, plagues, and cosmic disasters. But this enemy is beyond our abilities to fight. They consume energy itself. They eat the very fabric of space. Against such a foe, all our technology and wisdom is useless." The chamber fell silent. Kyle could feel the despair in the air like a physical weight. These were the greatest minds and most powerful warriors in the galaxy, and they had all admitted defeat. Then something incredible happened. Chancellor Vex looked directly at Kyle. The tall alien's 4 eyes focused on the human section with what might have been hope. "There is one option we have not explored," he said slowly. "Perhaps it is time to consult the humans." The reaction was immediate. Voices rose in protest from across the chamber. The Corvin general laughed, a sound like metal grinding. "The humans? They barely have faster-than-light travel. Their weapons are primitive. Their ships are held together with metal bolts and chemical fuel." An Etherian's mental voice was full of disdain. "They are a young species, driven by emotion, rather than logic. They have been in space for less than 2 centuries. What could they possibly offer that we cannot provide?" But Chancellor Vex held up one of his 4 hands for silence. "The humans have a reputation," he said carefully. "They approach problems differently than we do. When faced with the impossible, they do not calculate probabilities or search for logical solutions. They simply try anyway." Kyle felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. 200 species, some of them millions of years old, were looking at humanity's representative and wondering if the newest, weakest members of their coalition might somehow have an answer to a problem that had defeated them all. "Admiral Morrison," Chancellor Vex said formally, "the Galactic Coalition requests humanity's assistance in our darkest hour. Will your species help us fight the Void Swarm?" Kyle stood up, feeling very small in the vast chamber. Around him, the greatest civilizations in the galaxy waited for his answer. Behind them all, red zones continued to spread across the galactic map as the Void Swarm devoured star after star. He thought about Earth, green and blue and full of life. He thought about the human colonies, still young and growing. He thought about his own people, who had clawed their way up from caves to starships in just a few thousand years. "Yes," Kyle said simply, "we'll help." And for the first time since the crisis began, something like hope flickered in the Grand Council chamber. Captain Lisa Chun was 3,000 light years from home when the emergency message reached her ship. She had been exploring a nebula that might contain rare minerals when the communication array lit up with the highest priority signal she had ever seen. "Captain, we're getting orders to return to Coalition space immediately," said her communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Brooks. "They want us at Nexus Prime within 48 hours. Lisa looked up from the star charts she had been studying. Her ship, the New Frontier, was a small exploration vessel with a crew of 30 humans. They were supposed to be mapping empty space for the next 6 months. Emergency recalls like this were serious business. Any idea what this is about?" She asked. "No, ma'am, but Admiral Morrison sent the recall personally. And the message came with codes I've never seen before." "This is big." Lisa nodded and turned to her pilot. "Jake, plot a course for Nexus Prime. Best possible speed." Commander Jake Sullivan had been flying ships since he was 18 years old. He had fought in the resource wars back on Earth, where different nations had battled over the last oil and water reserves. Those wars had taught him that sometimes the impossible was just another word for difficult. Course plotted, Captain. We'll be there in 36 hours if we push the engines hard. The new Frontier was not the most advanced ship in the human fleet, but it was reliable. Like most human technology, it was built to be fixed with simple tools and basic parts. While alien ships needed special facilities and rare materials for repairs, human vessels could be patched up with metal plates and determination. During the journey to Nexus Prime, more emergency messages arrived. Dr. Robert Kim, the ship's xenobiologist, spent hours reading classified reports about something called the Void Swarm. What he learned made him pale. "Captain, you need to see this," he said, calling Lisa to his laboratory. "The Coalition has been fighting these things for weeks now, and they're not winning. Look at these combat reports." Lisa studied the data on his screen. Ship after ship had engaged the Void Swarm entities with every weapon in the Coalition arsenal. Energy weapons, projectile cannons, fusion bombs, even exotic matter disruptors. Nothing worked. The swarm creatures just absorbed the attacks and grew stronger. "What exactly are these things?" she asked. Dr. Kim pulled up more files. "Near as we can tell, they're living energy, pure consciousness without physical form. They feed on matter and energy, but that's not all. Look at these psychological reports from survivors." The reports made Lisa's blood run cold. Crews who had faced the Void Swarm described overwhelming feelings of despair and hopelessness. Many had simply given up fighting, even when their weapons were still functional. Some had abandoned their ships without orders, fleeing in escape pods toward certain death in space. "They don't just eat matter," Dr. Kim explained. "They feed on fear. The more terrified their victims become, the stronger the swarm gets. It's like they turn panic into food." When the new Frontier arrived at Nexus Prime, Lisa could see the crisis written across the space station. Refugee ships filled every docking bay. Military vessels from dozens of species patrolled in tight formations, their crews jumping at every sensor ghost. Even the mighty Corvin, Empire's battleships, looked small and fragile next to the vast emptiness of space. Admiral Morrison was waiting for them in Conference Room 7, along with other human ship commanders who had been recalled from across the galaxy. Lisa recognized Captain Tony Mitchell from the heavy cruiser Defiant and Commander Steve Parker from the fast attack ship Longshot. These were experienced officers, people who had earned their positions through skill and courage. "Thank you all for coming quickly," Admiral Morrison began. "The situation is worse than anything we've faced before. The Galactic Coalition is losing this war, and they've asked us to help." He activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked where the Void Swarm had struck, and more red appeared even as they watched. At the current rate, the swarm would reach human space within 3 months. "Every species in the Coalition has tried to fight these things using their best tactics and weapons," Morrison continued. "The Zentari used mathematical precision. The Etherians tried psychic attacks. The Corvin Empire threw their biggest guns at them. Nothing worked." Captain Mitchell leaned forward. "What makes them think we can do better? Our weapons aren't more powerful than theirs. Our ships aren't faster or stronger." Morrison smiled grimly. "That's exactly what they think, too. But Dr. Kim here has been studying the combat reports, and he's found something interesting." Dr. Kim stood up and activated his own data display. Every species that has fought the Void Swarm has done so in a predictable way. They either ran away in organized retreats, or they fought using established military doctrine. Formation flying, coordinated attacks, logical targeting priorities. "And?" Commander Parker asked. and the swarm feeds on predictable emotional responses. Fear, despair, logical acceptance of defeat. But humans don't respond to impossible odds the same way other species do. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had been studying the psychological profiles, spoke up from her seat near the back. I've been reading about human military history. When faced with overwhelming enemies, we don't usually retreat in good order. Fight by the book. We tend to do crazy things. She pulled up historical examples on her tablet. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a massive army. The Alamo, where a small group fought to the death against impossible odds. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where people with no hope of victory fought anyway. Dr. Kim nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Other species calculate their chances and act accordingly. When defeat is mathematically certain, they surrender or retreat. But humans have a history of looking at impossible odds and saying, challenge. Accepted. Admiral Morrison looked around the room at his officers. The coalition wants us to try engaging the swarm with human tactics. Not because they think we're better fighters, but because they think we're crazy enough to try things that make no logical sense. Captain Shun raised her hand. What exactly? Are we talking about here? Flying directly at these things and shooting until we run out of ammunition? Something like that, Morrison admitted. The theory is that human unpredictability might confuse the swarm entities. They've never faced prey that responds to certain death with stubborn determination instead of fear. Commander Sullivan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. So we're supposed to be the galaxy's guinea pigs. Test subjects to see what happens when humans meet cosmic horror. In a way, yes, Morrison said. But think about it. Every other species in the galaxy has given up. They've all admitted that this enemy cannot be defeated. But has anyone actually tried fighting them with pure human stubbornness? The room fell quiet as the officers considered this. Lisa thought about her crew, good people who had signed up to explore strange new worlds, not to face the end of everything. But she also thought about Earth, green and blue and full of children who deserved a chance to grow up. When do we start? She asked. Morrison smiled. As soon as we can put together a task force. We're going to take a small fleet directly into a swarm's path and see what happens when they try to eat something that refuses to be digested. Dr. Kim pulled up one more display showing the psychological profiles of various species. The Zentari feel fear through mathematical probability. The Etherians experience terror through psychic projection. The Corvan Empire knows despair through tactical analysis. He pointed to the human profile at the bottom of the list. But humans feel fear and then get angry about it. We experience terror and respond with spite. When faced with certain death, we tend to get stubborn and start making jokes. Captain Mitchell grinned. You're saying we might actually be too mean to die? I'm saying, Dr. Kim replied, that we're about to find out if the most human response to cosmic horror is to look it in the eye and say, "Is that all you got?" Admiral Morrison stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to attempt something that every advanced civilization in the galaxy considers impossible. We're going to pick a fight with creatures made of pure destructive energy, using ships held together with metal bolts and human determination. He looked around the room at his officers, these representatives of a species that had climbed down from trees just a few million years ago, and somehow made it to the stars. Any questions? Commander Parker raised his hand. Just one, sir. None? We fly into this thing and start shooting. What should we tell our crews? Morrison thought for a moment, then smiled. Tell them that when no one knew what to do, they called in the humans. And it's time to show the galaxy why. The human fleet that assembled near the edge of Coalition space looked nothing like a proper military formation. Admiral Morrison watched from his command ship as vessels of every shape and size took their positions. They were proper military. Cruisers like Captain Mitchell's Defiant, but there were also cargo haulers, mining ships, and even converted passenger liners. Captain Danny Brooks commanded what used to be an asteroid mining vessel called the Rock Hopper. His crew had spent the last 2 days loading it with every explosive they could find. Industrial mining charges, military torpedoes, and even boxes of old-fashioned dynamite left over from Earth's early space program. "Sir, the Rock Hopper is reporting ready," said Lieutenant Rodriguez from our communication station. "Captain, Brooks says his ship is now officially the most dangerous flying bomb in human space." Morrison nodded. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made humans different. Other species would never consider turning a mining ship into a weapon. It went against all military logic and safety regulations. But humans had a long history of using whatever was available when their backs were against the wall. Engineer Maria Santos had done something even more creative with her transport ship, the Steady Hand. She had rigged together every piece of human technology she could find in the ship's cargo holds. Electromagnetic pulse generators designed for clearing space debris. Gravitational distortion units meant for moving heavy cargo. Even some experimental equipment that the manufacturers sighed would never work properly. "Santos reports her ship is ready too," Rodriguez continued. "She says the Steady Hand is now equipped with weapons that probably shouldn't exist, powered by systems that definitely shouldn't work together." "And they do work?" Morrison asked. "She says they work great, but she has no idea why, and she's pretty sure they violate several laws of physics." This was another thing that made humans unique. Other species designed their technology to work according to careful scientific principles. Humans built things that worked and worried about understanding them later. If something solved a problem, they used it, even if they couldn't explain how or why it functioned. The fleet began moving toward the coordinates where Coalition scouts had last detected void swarm activity. As they traveled, Morrison received updates from across the galaxy. The news was all bad. 3 more star systems had gone dark in the past day. Refugee streams were clogging every major trade route. Some species were already discussing evacuation to other galaxies. Captain Lisa Chun's ship, the New Frontier, was running sensor sweeps ahead of the main fleet. Her science officer, Dr. Kim, was trying to understand how the void swarm entities moved through space. What he found was disturbing. "Captain, these things don't follow normal physics," he reported. "They're not flying through space so much as consuming it. Wherever they go, they leave holes in reality itself." Chun studied the sensor readings. The swarm entities appeared as dark spots on their screens, areas where space itself seemed to be missing. Around these holes, matter and energy were being drawn in like water down a drain. "How do you fight something that eats the universe?" she asked. "I don't know," Dr. Kim admitted, "but I'm hoping we're about to find out." The first contact came when they were still 2 light hours away from the target system. Commander Jake Sullivan, piloting one of the scout ships, detected something massive moving in their direction. It was bigger than anything in the Coalition databases, a dark shape that seemed to bend space around itself. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," came the voice over the fleet communications. "We have contact with a void swarm entity. This is what we came here to do. Remember, every other species in the galaxy has tried fighting these things with logic and proper tactics. We're going to try something different." Captain Mitchell on the Defiant was the first to engage. His ship opened fire with every weapon it had, but instead of targeting the center of the entity, like military doctrine suggested, he aimed randomly at different parts of it. His crew played loud music over the ship's speakers while they fought. Old Earth rock songs that talked about fighting against impossible odds. The result was immediate and unexpected. The void swarm entity, which had absorbed every previous attack without effort, began to flicker and change shape. It seemed confused by the random targeting and the strange sounds coming from the human ship. Captain Brooks, in the rock hopper, saw his chance. Instead of making a careful bombing run, he flew his converted mining ship directly at the entity, while his crew sang drinking songs at the top of their lungs. When he was close enough to see the thing's energy patterns with naked eyes, he detonated every explosive on his ship at once. The explosion should have destroyed the rockhopper completely. Instead, something impossible happened. The blast created a hole in the void swarm entity, and instead of closing immediately like previous damage had done, the hole stayed open. Dark energy leaked out like blood from a wound. Did we just hurt that thing? Brooks asked over the radio, his voice filled with amazement. Engineer Santos decided to test her jury-rigged equipment. She fired her electromagnetic pulse generators at the entity, while simultaneously activating her gravitational distorters. The combination created an effect that no scientist had ever theorized was possible. The entity began to shake and vibrate, its energy patterns becoming unstable. "Santos to all ships," came her excited voice. "I think I'm making it sick." The void swarm entity tried to retreat, something that had never been recorded in any previous encounter. But Commander Sullivan had positioned his fast attack ship behind it, and he began firing everything he had, while his crew shouted insults at the cosmic horror in 3 different languages. Dr. Kim, watching from the new frontier, was taking readings. Frantically, "Captain, this is incredible. The entity's energy patterns are completely chaotic. It's like it doesn't know how to respond to random, unpredictable attacks." The battle continued for 20 minutes, with human ships attacking from all directions, using tactics that made no military sense. Captain Mitchell flew in circles around the entity while firing randomly. Brooks launched individual mining charges one at a time instead of in coordinated salvos. Santos kept activating different pieces of equipment to see what would happen, and slowly and possibly, the void swarm entity began to fall apart. "All ships fall back to safe distance," Morrison ordered, as the entity's energy patterns became increasingly unstable. "I think it's about to explode." The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. Instead of a normal blast of energy and debris, the entity seemed to implode on itself, creating a brief whirlpool in space before disappearing completely. The human fleet found itself floating in empty space, where moments before there had been a creature the size of a small moon. "Is it dead?" Captain Shun asked over the communications channel. Dr. Kim was studying his sensor readings with disbelief. "I think so. The energy signatures are gone. There's no trace of it left anywhere." Admiral Morrison felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They had done something that every advanced species in the galaxy had said was impossible. They had killed a void swarm entity. But now came the real question. "Rodriguez, send a message to Coalition Command," he ordered. "Tell them we have engaged and destroyed a void swarm entity using unconventional tactics. Request permission to continue operations." The reply came back within an hour, and Morrison could hear the excitement in the Coalition commander's voice, even through the translation software. "Admiral Morrison, this is Chancellor Vex. Our sensors confirm the destruction of the entity. This is the first time in recorded history that anyone has successfully killed a void swarm creature. How did you do it?" Morrison looked around at his mixed fleet of military ships, converted cargo haulers, and jury-rigged mining vessels. He thought about his crews, who had faced cosmic horror with rock music and random weapons fire. "We did it by not knowing it was impossible," he replied, "and by getting angry instead of scared." There was a long pause before Chancellor Vex responded. "Admiral, the Coalition formally requests that you continue your operations. We need to know if this was luck or if you have found a way to fight these creatures." Morrison smiled as he looked at his officers. They were grinning like children who who had just pulled off the greatest prank in history. They had faced the terror of the galaxy and somehow made it blink first. Roger that, Chancellor, we're going hunting. As the human fleet began moving toward the next swarm contact, word of their victory spread across Coalition space. For the first time since the crisis began, there was hope. The humans had done something impossible, and they were ready to do it again. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the best way to fight a cosmic horror was with stubborn humans who refused to be impressed by things that were supposed to be scary. News of the human victory spread through Coalition space faster than light-speed communications could carry it. On every world, in every fleet, alien species who had given up hope suddenly found themselves asking the same question. How had the humans done the impossible? Dr. Patricia Lee sat in her laboratory aboard the research station Harmony, studying the battle recordings that Admiral Morrison had sent. As the Coalition's leading expert on alien psychology, she had been asked, "Explain what made the human approach different from every other species." Attempts. The recordings showed something that defied everything she knew about the Void Swarm, the energy entities that had consumed entire fleets without taking damage were retreating from human ships. Some were even showing signs of what could only be called confusion. "Computer, replay section 7 through 12, she said, watching the footage for the 20th time. On her screen, Captain Brooks flew his mining ship directly at a creature that could eat stars, while his crew sang old Earth songs about freedom and rebellion. The Void Swarm entity reacted to this approach in a way it had never reacted to anything before. Instead of simply absorbing the attack, it hesitated. Its energy patterns flickered. For just a moment, it seemed almost uncertain. Dr. Lee made notes in her research file. The entities appear to feed on predictable emotional responses. Fear generates energy they can consume. Despair makes them stronger. But human responses to danger are often unpredictable. Instead of fear, humans often experience anger. Instead of despair, they show spite. She pulled up psychological profiles from other species. The Centauri responded to overwhelming danger by calculating survival probabilities. When the math showed certain death, they accepted it logically. The Etherians faced cosmic threats by expanding their consciousness, seeking understanding even in destruction. The Corvin Empire met impossible odds with disciplined military formations and coordinated tactics, but humans were different. When faced with certain death, they often became more determined, not less. When confronted with cosmic horror, they frequently responded with dark humor and stubborn refusal to be impressed. They treated the impossible as merely inconvenient. Computer, open communication channel to Admiral Morrison, Dr. Lee said. When the Admiral's face appeared on her screen, she could see the excitement in his eyes. "Dr. Lee, I hope you have some good news for us. We're about to engage another swarm group, and I'd like to understand what we're doing right." "Admiral, I believe I know why your tactics are working. The Void Swarm entities have existed for millions of years, feeding on the fear and despair of their victims. They've developed perfect responses to logical military tactics and predictable emotional reactions. But they've never encountered anything like human psychology." She sent him her preliminary findings. Every species they've fought has responded to overwhelming power with either terror or tactical withdrawal. You're the first to respond with irritation and random violence. Admiral Morrison laughed. "So you're saying we're winning because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten?" "Exactly. And there's more. I believe the swarm entities actually need predictable responses to function properly. Your chaotic tactics are like feeding them food they can't digest. It's making them sick." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "We're about to test that theory, Doctor. We've got reports of a major swarm concentration 3 systems from here. Instead of one entity, we're looking at maybe a dozen. Commander Steve Parker was preparing his ship, the Longshot, for the upcoming battle when he received Dr. Lee's research. Data. His crew gathered around as he explained the theory to them. "So let me get this straight," said his weapons officer, Lieutenant Carl Foster. "These things are cosmic horrors that eat stars and planets, but they get confused when we shoot at them randomly and play loud music?" "That's about the size of it," Parker confirmed. "Dr. Lee thinks they're like a computer program that's never encountered our kind of input. We're basically causing them to crash." Foster grinned. "Well, if random chaos is what they want, we can definitely provide that. I've been working on something special." He led the crew to the weapons bay, where he had been modifying their missile systems. Instead of programming the missiles to target efficiently, he had set them to fly in completely random patterns before hitting their targets. Some would loop in circles. Others would fly backwards before turning around. A few were programmed to play music while they flew. "Foster, this is either brilliant or completely insane," Parker said, examining the modifications. "Why not both, sir?" Meanwhile, Captain Tony Mitchell was having a similar conversation with his crew aboard the Defiant. His chief engineer, Lieutenant Helen Gray, had been studying the technical reports from the first battle. "Captain, I think I understand what Engineer Santos did with her gravitational distorters," Gray said. "She used them in a way that no sane engineer would ever try. The equipment should have exploded, but instead it created some kind of feedback loop that hurt the swarm entity." Mitchell looked at the technical diagrams Gray had prepared. "Are you suggesting we deliberately misuse our equipment?" "I'm suggesting we use it in ways it was never designed for. Human technology is built to be adaptable. We make things that can be modified and jury-rigged. Alien tech is usually too specialized for that kind of improvisation." Gray had spent the past day working with the ship's systems, connecting equipment that was never meant to work together. She had linked the communication array to the shield generators, connected the navigation computer to the weapon systems, and tied the life support systems into the engine controls. "Gray, if any of this goes wrong, it could kill us all," Mitchell pointed out. "Yes, sir, but if it goes right, it might kill them instead." The human fleet assembled for their second major engagement was even more chaotic than the first. Word had spread through human space about the victory against the Void Swarm, and volunteers had come from everywhere. Cargo pilots, asteroid miners, even civilian yacht owners had shown up with ships loaded with improvised weapons. Captain Lisa Chun watched the mixed fleet take formation and shook her head in amazement. There were over 60 ships now, ranging from proper military vessels to a luxury liner whose owner had mounted mining lasers on the observation deck. "This has to be the most disorganized fleet in military history," she told Dr. Kim. "Maybe that's exactly what we need," he replied. "Every other species fights with coordination and discipline. We're fighting with chaos and creativity." Admiral Morrison gave the order to advance toward the swarm concentration. As they approached the target system, sensors detected not one massive entity, but a whole group of them. 12 void swarm creatures, each one large enough to consume a planet, were feeding on the remains of a dead star. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Remember, these things expect us to be afraid. They expect us to retreat or attack with logical tactics. We're going to give them something they've never seen before." The engagement began with Captain Parker's ship launching its modified missiles. The weapons flew in impossible patterns, some of them actually flying away from their targets before suddenly turning around. The swarm entities tried to track the incoming missiles, but seemed unable to predict their chaotic flight paths. Engineer Santos, now commanding a small squadron of converted cargo ships, activated her jury-rigged systems all at once. The combination of mismatched equipment created energy patterns that had never existed before in the universe. The swarm entities recoiled from these impossible energies like they had been burned. Captain Mitchell's deliberately sabotaged systems produced effects that violated several laws of physics. His ship began emitting gravitational waves in the key of B-flat, while his weapons fired in rhythm with old Earth military marching songs. The Void Swarm entities, faced with this assault of organized chaos, began to behave in ways that had never been recorded. Some tried to retreat. Others spun in circles as if they were dizzy. One actually seemed to be trying to communicate, sending out energy pulses that sounded almost like questions. Dr. Kim, monitoring everything from the new frontier, was recording data frantically. Captain, the entities are showing signs of distress. Their energy patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. I think we're giving them some kind of mental breakdown. The battle continued for over an hour, with human ships attacking in ways that made no tactical sense, but somehow kept working. By the time it was over, 8 of the 12 swarm entities had been destroyed, and the remaining 4 had fled into deep space. Admiral Morrison looked at the sensor readings with satisfaction. They had just won their second impossible victory. And this time they had faced multiple enemies at once. Rodriguez, send another message to Coalition Command, he ordered. Tell them we've engaged and defeated a major swarm concentration. The humans are officially in the cosmic horror fighting business. The reply from Chancellor Vex came quickly. Admiral Morrison, Coalition sensors confirm 12 swarm signatures at your location, now reduced to 0. This is beyond remarkable. Can your tactics be taught to other species? Morrison thought about the question. Could you teach aliens to think like humans? Could you train logical, disciplined species to be chaotic and unpredictable? We can try, Chancellor. But I think it might be easier to just send more humans. The message that changed everything came from the Corvan Empire 3 weeks after the second human victory. General Kraft, the supreme military commander of the most powerful war machine in the galaxy, was asking for help from species he had once called primitive. Admiral Morrison read the transmission twice before he could believe it. The Corvan Empire formally requests instruction in human combat methods. We have observed your victories against the Void Swarm and wish to learn your techniques. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her communication station with amazement. Sir, we're getting similar requests from 17 other species. The Zentari Mathematical Institute wants to study chaos theory applications in warfare. The Etherian Council is asking about emotional unpredictability training. Morrison smiled. A month ago, most alien species had barely acknowledged that humans existed. Now they were asking to be taught how to think like humans. It was the most ridiculous situation in galactic history. Set up training facilities on Nexus Prime. He ordered. If they want to learn how to be chaotic and unpredictable, we'll teach them. Captain Tony Mitchell and Dr. Helen Gray were the first human instructors to arrive at the Coalition's main base. What they found there surprised them. The great military minds of the galaxy were gathered like students in a classroom, waiting to learn tactics that went against everything they had been taught. General Kraft of the Corvan Empire stood 8 feet tall and was covered in armor that could stop starship weapons. He had commanded fleets that conquered entire sectors of space. Now he was asking a human engineer to teach him how to jury-rig equipment in ways that shouldn't work. Explain to me again why connecting the communication system to the weapons array improves combat effectiveness. Kraft asked Gray, his voice confused but determined. Gray scratched her head. Well, it doesn't really improve anything in a logical sense, but it creates unexpected interference patterns that seem to confuse the swarm entities. They can't predict what our systems will do because we don't know either. A Zentari mathematician named Flex raised one of his 4 arms. But how do you calculate the probability of success if the outcome is deliberately random? You don't, Captain Mitchell explained. That's the point. The swarm creatures have spent millions of years learning to predict how their enemies will behave. They know how to counter logical tactics and organized responses. But they've never faced anyone who fights without a plan. The training sessions that followed were unlike anything in military history. Human instructors taught advanced alien civilizations how to make mistakes on purpose, how to act without thinking, and how to respond to overwhelming odds with jokes. And stubborn determination. Commander Steve Parker worked with a group of Etherian pilots, trying to teach them how to fly in patterns that made no tactical sense. The Etherians, who could normally coordinate their movements through telepathy, found it almost impossible to be truly random. You're still thinking too much, Parker told them. Stop trying to make your flight path logical. Just fly wherever feels interesting. An Etherian pilot named Whisper spoke directly into Parker's mind. But Commander, how can we fight effectively if we do not coordinate our attacks? By being so uncoordinated that the enemy can't figure out what you're trying. Do, Parker replied. Sometimes the best strategy is to have no strategy at all. Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Chun was teaching coalition engineers how to modify their equipment in ways that violated safety regulations. Her student was a silicon lord named Crystal, a being made of living rock who could reshape matter with thought. Alone. The key is to connect systems that were never meant to work together, Chun explained, showing Crystal how to wire a shield generator backward. If it should explode, it probably won't. If it should work perfectly, it definitely won't do what you expect. Crystal's voice sounded like grinding stone. This approach seems dangerously illogical. What if the modifications cause system failure? Then, you fix it with whatever you have available and keep fighting, Chun said. Human ships break down all the time. We've gotten very good at making repairs with spare parts and determination. The real test came when the training fleet encountered a void swarm scouting force near the edge of Coalition space. The mixed fleet of human ships and alien vessels using human tactics engaged the enemy in what could only be described as organized chaos. General Croft, commanding a Corvan battleship that had been modified beyond recognition, opened fire with weapons that were connected to his ship's life support system. The result was a beam that changed color every few seconds and made a sound like singing. The void swarm entities immediately began behaving strangely. They had fought Corvan ships before and knew how to counter their disciplined tactics. But they had never faced a Corvan commander who was deliberately fighting without discipline. The Centauri squadron, led by mathematician Flex, had programmed their computers to make random decisions. Their ships flew in mathematical patterns that were technically perfect but served no tactical purpose. Their weapons fired in sequences, based on prime numbers and ancient poetry. The Etherian pilots had learned to break their telepathic coordination. Instead of moving as one mind, each pilot acted independently, following impulses and emotional responses instead of logical battle plans. The result was beautiful chaos that the swarm entities couldn't predict or counter. But the most surprising result came from the Silicon Lords. Crystal had taken Chun's lessons to heart and modified her ship in ways that defied the laws of physics. She had connected her matter manipulation abilities to the ship's weapons, creating projectiles that changed their composition mid-flight. Some started as metal and became energy. Others began as solid matter and turned into pure mathematics. Void swarm entities, faced with weapons that changed their fundamental nature while flying toward them, began to retreat for the first time in recorded history. They had no experience with attacks that violated reality itself. Dr. Patricia Lai, monitoring the battle from her research station, watched her instruments with growing excitement. The entities are showing unprecedented levels of confusion. Their energy patterns are completely chaotic. I think we're giving them the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. The battle ended with complete human victory, but this time it wasn't just humans who had won. The alien crews, using human tactics and human thinking, had proven that the chaos approach could work for other species too. Admiral Morrison received reports from across the galaxy. As news of the victory spread, coalition fleets that had been in full retreat were stopping and regrouping. Planets that had been preparing for evacuation were canceling their emergency plans. For the first time since the crisis began, the Void Swarm was losing ground. "Sir, we're getting requests for human tactical instructors from every major species," Rodriguez reported. "Everyone wants to learn how to fight like humans." Morrison looked at the galaxy map, where red zones marking swarm activity were beginning to shrink instead of grow. "Send instructors to everyone who asks. If they want to learn how to be chaotic and unpredictable, we'll teach the whole galaxy." Captain Mitchell contacted him from the training facility. "Admiral, you should see this. We've got Corvan generals learning how to tell jokes while they fight. Centauri mathematicians are studying human music to understand rhythm in combat. Even the Silicon Lords are practicing emotional responses." Morrison laughed. "A month ago, they thought we were barely civilized. Now they're trying to become more like us." "It's working too," Mitchell continued. "The alien crews who've learned human tactics are winning battles that should have been impossible. We're not just teaching them how to fight the swarm. We're teaching them how to be human." The most important message came from Chancellor Vex himself. "Admiral Morrison, the Coalition formally recognizes that human tactical doctrine has saved the galaxy. We request that humanity take command of all anti-swarm operations." Morrison read the message again, hardly believing what he was seeing. The species that had barely accepted humans into their coalition were now asking humans to lead them. "Rodriguez, send a reply to the Chancellor. Tell him we accept command, but on one condition." "What condition, sir?" Morrison smiled as he looked at the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Human instructors were teaching aliens how to think chaotically. Alien crews were learning to fight with humor and determination. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were discovering that sometimes the best response to cosmic horror was to laugh at it and hit it with something unexpected. Tell him that from now on, when no one knows what to do, they don't just call in the humans. They think like humans. The whole galaxy is about to learn what it means to be stubborn, chaotic, and too mean to quit. The final battle began at the edge of known space, where the Void Swarm had built something that terrified every scientist in the galaxy. Coalition long-range sensors had detected a massive structure feeding on the collapsed remains of an entire star cluster. It was larger than anything the swarm had created before, a writhing mass of dark energy that stretched across light years of space. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Determination, watching the largest fleet in galactic history assemble around him. 5,000 ships from every species in the coalition had come together for this final push. But these weren't the same disciplined, logical fleets that had failed against the swarm before. These were crews who had learned to think like humans. Captain Frank Lopez commanded a squadron of converted Corvan battleships whose crews had spent months learning human tactics. His second in command was General Kraft, who now wore a baseball cap instead of his ceremonial armor and had learned to swear in 7 human languages. "Admiral, the Corvan Death Fleet reports ready for chaotic engagement," Lopez announced over the communications channel. "General Kraft says his crews are prepared to, and I quote, kick some cosmic butt." Morrison smiled. 3 months ago, Kraft had been the most formal, disciplined officer in the galaxy. Now he was leading his troops in songs about fighting impossible odds and winning anyway. Captain Lisa Chun's science division had grown to include researchers from dozens of species, all working together to understand how human unpredictability affected the void swarm. Dr. Kim worked alongside Zentari mathematicians who had learned to appreciate the beauty of random numbers, and Etherian psychologists who studied human emotional responses to fear. Admiral, our analysis of the swarm's central structure shows something interesting, Chun reported. It appears to be some kind of command center, coordinating all swarm activity across the galaxy. If we can destroy it, we might be able to cut off the entire invasion force. Dr. Patricia Lai, now leading a joint human-alien research team, had made the most important discovery of all. Sir, we've confirmed that the swarm entities are essentially a collective consciousness. They share information instantly across vast distances. But that also means they share confusion. If we can create enough chaos near their command center, it should spread through their entire network. Morrison nodded as he studied the tactical display. The swarm structure was protected by hundreds of entities, each one larger than the other. Creatures they had fought before. It should have been an impossible target for any attack. But the fleet he commanded wasn't any fleet. All ships. This is Admiral Morrison. Today, we're going to do something that every computer simulation says is impossible. We're going to fly directly into the heart of the Void Swarm's main base and destroy it using the most human tactic of all, stubborn refusal to accept that we can't win. Commander Steve Parker led the first wave, flying his ship the Longshot, straight toward the massive structure, while his crew played Earth's loudest rock music. Behind him came a mixed formation of human cargo ships, Centauri science vessels, and Etherian arc ships, all working together in beautiful, chaotic harmony. The Void Swarm entities that rose to meet them encountered something they had never faced before. Ships that flew in impossible patterns while broadcasting poetry in 17 languages. Weapons that fired in rhythm with ancient human battle songs. Crews that responded to cosmic horror by making jokes and inventing new insults. Captain Tony Mitchell's engineering team had created the most ambitious jury-rigged system in history. They had connected ships from different species into a single, impossible network. Human determination powered Zentari mathematical calculations, which guided Corvin weapons, while Etherian creativity provided targeting solutions that existed in 4 dimensions. The result was a weapon that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Energy beams that changed color based on human emotions. Missiles that flew in patterns inspired by human art. Shield systems that protected ships by confusing reality itself. Engineer Maria Santos, now commanding a fleet of converted cargo vessels, activated every piece of modified equipment at once. The space around the swarm structure filled with gravitational waves playing human symphonies, electromagnetic pulses that spelled out poetry, and energy fields that made the vacuum of space ring like a bell. The Void Swarm entities began to behave in ways that violated everything known about them. Some spun in circles as if they were dizzy. Others flickered between dimensions like broken holographs. A few actually seemed to be trying to retreat, something that had never been recorded in millions of years of swarm history. But the most important effect was happening inside the massive structure itself. The chaos being created by the human lead. Fleet was spreading through the swarm's collective consciousness like a virus. Entities across the galaxy began to slow down, their attacks becoming confused and uncoordinated. Captain Danny Brooks, still flying his converted mining ship, led a desperate charge directly into the structure's core. His crew sang Old Earth, songs about home and freedom, while they flew through corridors of pure energy that should have destroyed them instantly. "Brooks to all ships," came his voice over the radio, calm despite flying through cosmic horror. "I'm inside this thing, and it doesn't like visitors. Recommend everyone else follow my example and make as much noise as possible." The final assault was launched by Admiral Morrison himself. Leading every ship that could still fly, he ordered a coordinated attack that was perfectly uncoordinated. Every captain attacked whatever target looked interesting. Every crew responded to impossible odds by getting more determined instead of more afraid. General Kraft, commanding his modified Corvin battleship, fired weapons that played human music while they destroyed swarm entities. His crew, who had learned to fight with joy instead of grim duty, cheered every hit like they were watching a sports game. The Centauri squadron, led by mathematician Flex, used calculations based on human poetry to target weak points in the structure. Their weapons fired in patterns that followed the rhythm of Earth's greatest songs, creating destruction that was mathematically beautiful and tactically impossible. The Etherian pilots had learned to project human emotions into space itself. Their ships flew surrounded by feelings of hope, determination, and the peculiar human joy that comes from facing impossible odds and deciding to fight anyway. Dr. Kim, monitoring everything from his research station, watched as the swarm's collective consciousness began to collapse. Admiral, the entities are losing cohesion. Whatever we're doing, it's spreading through their entire network. Swarm forces across the galaxy are becoming confused and disorganized. The moment of victory came when the central structure began to implode. But instead of a normal collapse, it seemed to fold in on itself while playing every piece of human music the fleet had been broadcasting. The sound echoed through dimensions that had no names, carrying the message that some species were too stubborn to be consumed by cosmic horror. As the structure disappeared, taking the swarm's coordination with it, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Void swarm entities everywhere were retreating, fleeing back toward the dark spaces between galaxies, where they had hidden for millions of years. Admiral Morrison looked around at his bridge crew, these humans who had somehow saved the galaxy by teaching it to think differently. Lieutenant Rodriguez was grinning as she coordinated with alien fleets across space. Commander Sullivan was already planning pursuit missions to make sure the swarm kept running. "Sir, we're getting messages from every world in Coalition space," Rodriguez reported. "They're all saying the same thing. The swarm is retreating. The invasion is over. We won." Morrison activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. Today, we proved something that will be remembered for millions of years. When the universe throws cosmic horror at you, the best response is to look it in the eye and say, 'Is that all you got?'" The celebration that followed could be heard across the galaxy. Ships from hundreds of species flew together in formations that made no tactical sense but looked beautiful. Crews who had learned to think like humans sang songs about victory. Against impossible odds, Chancellor Vex's message arrived an hour later, his formal words barely hiding his amazement. "Admiral Morrison, the Galactic Coalition formally recognizes that humanity has saved our civilization. The Void Swarm has been defeated not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the most human quality of all, the absolute refusal to accept defeat." 6 months later, Admiral Morrison stood in the same council chamber where the crisis had begun. But everything was different now. The representatives of 200 species looked at the human section with respect instead of dismissal. On the walls hung banners with human sayings translated into every language in the galaxy. "When everyone else has given up, call the humans. The impossible just takes a little longer. We didn't know it couldn't be done, so we did it anyway." Chancellor Vex stood to address the assembly. "The galaxy has learned a valuable lesson. When faced with problems that seem impossible to solve, sometimes the answer is not to find a logical solution. Sometimes the answer is to refuse to accept that there is no solution.